decided to have a session that specifically focuses on the ADAS framework. So in summary, this class is going to deal with the unpacking of the ADAS framework to make it easy to understand, and then thereafter we are going to apply it in the assignment questions that we asked, both for MBA and the PBA assignments, because those are both of them, they have a question on ADAS framework. So I think by attempting, you are going to understand one or two aspects regarding how this framework works. Okay, so once I'm done unpacking the framework, I will go and show you how now it is applied, or how exam questions can be asked regarding the ADAS framework. Okay, so let me not take much of your time with these introductory remarks. Let's go straight into today's business. Okay, so as I was saying, I will briefly show you the focus of today's session and what we intend to cover. And then we start looking at the the short run aggregate supply, the long run aggregate supply. I will also show you the shifts in the aggregate supply, or what causes a shift in aggregate supply in the economy, what causes a change in aggregate supply in the economy. And then after that, we look at the aggregate demand. So the main idea here is to say, let's look at the aggregate supply separately from the aggregate demand curves. It is before then we will bring in the two pieces together and see how then we reach an equilibrium. So I want you to understand them separately, the aggregate demand, the aggregate supply side. Then we bring the two pieces together. We establish a what? A long run or short run macroeconomic equilibrium. Okay, so pay close attention. And then after that, I'm going to show you how you can approach the assignment question, specifically the one that deals with aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay, I hope my roadmap is clear for everyone, so that I don't want you to get lost. Poshia says I don't have sound. I think those in the chat section, you can try to assist. Just tell her to join audio or to join with audio. If you are using a cell phone, check at the bottom left corner, you see a microphone. If you are joining with a computer, you also allow join with audio. Okay. Anyways, let's move on and see how much ground we can cover, right? So like I've said, the focus here is to have an understanding of how the ADAS framework works. Okay? How GDP and the price level are determined in the economy. We want to understand how the forces, or we want to understand the forces that makes the economy either expand, contract, or remain stagnant, or to stagnate, right? So it is one of the outcomes of this class. By the end of this class, we need to understand how prices are determined in the economy at an aggregated level, not at a micro level, because at a micro level, we are simply looking at individual markets. For example, market for computers, market for tablets, market for specific commodities. Now in macroeconomics, we are looking at the economy as a whole. So we want to see how an equilibrium in the economy can be determined using the ADAS frameworks. We want also to understand what brings inflation. Okay, what brings inflation using the ADAS framework. So in this case, I will start with the aggregate supply side before I migrate to the aggregate demand side, right? I will then bring the two pieces together to generate an equilibrium in the economy. I will also try to apply the framework to the assignment questions that we have, okay? So I believe that we have MBA and PGD students here. So this session is going to be beneficial to both cohorts. Okay, so let me start with the aggregate supply side of the economy, or let me start with the aggregate supply curve. Okay. So in general, aggregate supply is the relationship between the quantity of real GDP supplied and the price level. Okay. You can call it, if you want to expand, it is the aggregate supply curve. If we are talking about a curve, remember we can present data in a spreadsheet, right? We have, okay, let me just try to simplify things here. Let me say I have my column of the goods supplied in the economy, total volume of goods supplied in the economy, and then I have the average prices. So which means I will be saying when the price level is this much, this amount of goods and services are supplied in the economy. At this price, this volume of goods is supplied. So when you're looking at the aggregate supply curve or aggregate supply in general, we are looking at the relationship between the quantity of real GDP supplied and the price level. Then this quantity, which quantity are we talking about? We are talking of the quantity of real GDP, which is supplied in the economy. What does it depend on? It depends on the quantity of labor employed in the economy, the quantity of physical and human capital, right? And then it depends also on the state of technology that we have in the economy. Let me pause a bit on the labor that is employed in the economy. If you want to understand what we are saying here better, let's take it at a micro level, and then we move on to a macro level. If you look at a micro level, if a company is employing 10 people, okay, there is a maximum output that these 10 people can produce, and they can't go beyond that. But if you hire more workers, for instance, maybe 20, or you double your workers, the expectation is that output is going to increase also. The company is also going to be able to produce higher output. This is at a micro level. But if now we look at the macro level, we are looking at all the firms together. So if the labor that is employed in the economy increases, or the labor that is hired in the economy goes up, it implies that the quantity of real GDP in the economy is also going to increase. So labor is a key determinant of output produced in the economy. The other determinant as well is the quantity of physical capital. Remember, we have two things here. There's physical capital and human capital, right? Can someone distinguish between physical and human capital? What is physical capital? What are we looking at? Okay. Physical capital, yeah.
Well, wouldn't it be infrastructure?
Yes. For example, like maybe specify.
I need a friend to assist. I can't think of any. Okay. But I think with the physical, it would be more infrastructure in terms of equipment and yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. By physical capital, I see others are talking of land, buildings, etc. In summary, we can call those maybe, for example, plant and machinery. If you're a company that is into manufacturing, there is need for you to have plant and machinery. It can be a processing plant. If you are into copper processing, definitely you would need capital, physical, the physical side of capital. That is one thing. But as a company, you also need human capital. When you're looking at human capital, these are the skills, right? Developed through training, and it can be through education, formal education, on-the-job training, all those aspects, they form part of what? Of human capital. So now, if an economy invests much of its income in training of employees, or let's start at the company level. If you train your human resources, definitely you are highly likely to witness an increase in productivity, because the more skilled the human resources are, the higher probability of them producing better or higher quality products, if I may say so, or there's likely to be an improvement in productivity, right? Instead of one worker producing 10 units per day, maybe because of training or because of development, because of investment in human capital, they end up doubling the output. This is at a micro level or at an individual level. But what if now that is happening to the entire economy? You can definitely think of the outcome that we can witness. And the state of technology, right? Definitely technology is a key determinant of aggregate supply in the economy, right? Investment in technology, think of a company that is using like old ways of producing output, okay? If you look at the construction industry, you would find out that if you look at the road surfacing market, you have people who lay road asphalt using like the traditional way of using wheelbarrows. They use much of it's labor intensive in actual sense, because they use a lot of people to conduct the tasks. But now with the coming in of technology, you can understand that they can even buy a paver, right? That is only operated by one person who will be controlling the machine. But that person is able to lay asphalt or tar on the maybe 10 kilometers on a single day, which cannot be done by. I'm just trying to show you how technology can actually be a key key determinant of the quantity of output that is produced in the economy. Okay.
Hello, Dr. Wells.
Yes.
I don't know if you're gonna adjust the other students who are failing to join because it's reached capacity.
Okay, let me see if there's something that we can do at the moment. Okay, just hold on.
Okay.
Oh, sorry guys for that. I think the admin is trying to do something regarding that, so they will update us if they are winning on the extension of the room to allow others in. Or maybe if they know prior to this that it's going to reach more than 100, they were going to convert it into a webinar or something. Okay, so at any given time, the quantity of capital, the state of technology are fixed, right? Because why do we say the state of technology is fixed, or the quantity of capital at any given time is fixed? Because it depends on decisions that have been made in the past, right? Remember, when you are investing in human capital, for example, right, it's not something that you can change in the short run, because the human capital that we will experience today as a company is a result of the investments that have been made 3 years or 5 years ago, right? So that's why we say in this current year, we are going to have a certain level of human capital or a certain level of human skills, which might be difficult to change within a very short period of time. For example, if you want to have an engineering degree, right, it might not take you a short period of time to have that, but you need to invest time in attending college classes until you become a certain a qualified engineer, right? So I'm saying at a given time, the quantity of capital and the state of technology are fit. The same way it might take time for a company to hire more equipment. They would need to make decisions prior to that, and then they will buy more of the capital or more of these assets after some time. So in general, it is an assumption that quantity of capital and state of technology are fit. The only way to change them, it can be changed in the long run, right? So that's why we are saying it depends on the decisions that have been made in the past. So the labor market can be in 3 states. So remember here we talked of 3 determinants of the real GDP in the economy, or of the quality of goods supplied in the economy. We talked of labor, we talked of physical and human capital, we talked of state of technology. These are 3 main, but doesn't mean that this is an exhaustive list. No, there are other factors that we can list here, but I decided to talk on these 3, right? So we said the state of technology and quantity of capital is fixed, but labor now, right? The labor market can be in 3 states. We can have full employment labor market, where all the labor that is available is fully employed, okay? Where the amount of labor or the amount of people, the number of people who are willing to work at the given wage rate is exactly equivalent to the number of job opportunities that are available. So everyone is employed. So this one is not realistic because it is not realized in many economies. It is very difficult to find an economy that has got 0 unemployment rates, right? But doesn't mean that it is not that. Even if you find that all the people are employed, there are some resources that will always be lying idle. You can't utilize all of them. So in most cases, the economy is always found to operate below full employment or below the full level of employment or below its potential output level. So we can operate also above full employment. When you operate above full employment, that's when you experience a boom in the economy. Remember, if you have come across something like this in the economy, you can witness what they call business cycles, right? Okay. They call them business cycles. Why are they called business cycles? Right, business cycles, because we have a trend. This will be the potential GDP or potential level of output. But it is possible that the economy can go above full employment, goes below, but it will be navigating around the trend. Okay, all right. Let me take you back to where we were. All right, so if you look at this, you can see that we can also have a case whereby we operate below full employment, right? That is the labor market. So as employment fluctuates around full employment, the quantity of real GDP supplied fluctuates around its potential GDP. So the potential GDP is what we call the natural rate of employment or the full level of employment, right? So that's the reason why we have business cycles. One of the reasons why we experience a boom in the economy, a slump or a recession, and then a boom again, over and over again. One of the reasons is because of the fluctuations in employment levels. Okay, so the long run aggregate supply curve is always vertical and is always located at the potential what level of GDP, right? The key point to note here is that the potential GDP is independent of the price level. potential GDP is independent of the price level. It does not depend on the price level. I will show you why am I saying this. Right. Okay. So, on this graph here, I have the long run aggregate supply curve, which is vertically above the potential 13 trillion US dollars. That's the real GDP. This is the value of goods produced in the economy. But in this case, it is the potential, or if when all the resources in the economy are fully utilized, this will be what we will recognize, right? So that's why we say it is vertically above the potential level of GDP, which is what we term the long run aggregate what? Supply curve. It is vertical. I will explain why we have such a curve, right? So why is the short run aggregate supply curve? Why the short run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping? Why is it upward sloping, right? The reason for that is because when the price level changes in the economy,
Doctor.
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I am actually being left behind. I am thinking because I'm still on the second last bullet point before we went to the illustration of the one regarding yes.
Okay.
I think I'm not understanding how the long run aggregate supply curve is always vertical.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm going to explain, and I'm sure in the following slides to demonstrate why do we say we have a vertical long run aggregate supply curve and an upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve. It's very important that we understand that. So I will start with the explanation of the short run.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
And then I will migrate to the long run aggregate supply curve. So why is it that the short run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping? By upward sloping, what we mean is that if you draw your curve like this, whereby here you have your price level and here you have your real GDP, which is what we call Y, or we call it GDP for real GDP, you have a curve like this, which is what we call the short run what? Aggregate supply curve. Why is it upward sloping like this? It is upward sloping because it shows us the relationship between Y. Okay, I'll start with P1, Y1, and then we have another. Okay, why is it like that? It is because when the price level changes, money wages or other costs are assumed to be fixed in the short run. Why is it that? Let me show you why. Remember, when we experience inflation or when we experience prices of commodities going up, in the short run, companies, because of contracts that they have with their employees, they can't just change wages in the short run. They sign contracts with their employers. They even businesses themselves, they also have contracts with their suppliers. So the prices at which they buy their inputs, be it labor, be it other inputs that are used in the production process, those prices are held constant even when the price level is going up, which means it will take a certain period of time before these money wages or all other costs that we are looking at here. Here, I just gave you an example of one of the costs that businesses face. All these other costs, they are assumed to be constant, all right? So when, for example, I'll show you an equation that is used to determine real wages. I will call it real wage. If we have real wages, which means that we also have nominal wages, right? Nominal wages is just the wage that has not been adjusted for inflation. But when we are talking now for real wages, we are looking at the nominal wage W divided by the price level what do we want to see? We want to see, okay, if you are getting 2,000 rands as your wage, if you divide by the average price level in the economy, we want to see how much commodities is that wage going to buy, right? So we are saying here, the nominal wage is W. And if you're assuming that nominal wages are held constant in the short run, they don't change. Why? Because of these contracts that we are talking of. There is stickiness of wages in the short run. Prices of other factors of production are assumed to be constant, right? So when the price level increases from year to year, which means this fraction, if the prices are increasing, what happens to the entire fraction? Help me hear those. It what?
The real wages will be lower.
Yes. So if the price level is increasing in the economy, holding all other costs or money wages constant or nominal wages constant, the implication is that real wages in the economy will fall, right? Which means that now companies will find it easier to even hire more labor or to produce even more output to supply on the market. Which means that's the reason why they will increase their production when the price level increases. That's why we see an upward sloping curve in the short run. You understand what I'm saying here? We have, it's quite unfortunate. A lot of people are trying to join in, but I think the team is not willing to expand the maximum number of people that can be allowed into the meeting. I don't know, but maybe they will listen to the recording. Okay, it's fine. So we are talking of here the idea of the money wages. Money wages is simply the nominal wage rates, right? So that's why we experience an upward sloping curve. So when the price level increases, holding all the other constant, all the other prices, all the other wages or other costs constant, companies will respond to this by increasing what? Production. That's why you see this happen, right? If you want to understand this better, just look at a micro level or at a company level, right? The prices of output that the company is selling is going up, but the costs are held constant. The company will respond to this by increasing production. You understand that? But now, in the long run, now answering the question that was asked before, to say, why do we have a vertical aggregate supply curve in the long run? It is because in the long run, both price level or prices in general will rise by the same percentage as the wage rate. Remember, wage rate is one of the costs, but there are a lot of costs that are involved in production. I'm using wage rate as an example. So we are saying, if the wage rate increases from, let's say, 100 to, let's say, 130, I don't know what percentage is it, you can calculate and see. When this happens, wages or money wages, or actually the nominal wages, they will also change by the same magnitude, right? They will change by the same magnitude. When they change by the same magnitude, the implication of this is that the real wage rate, if the prices is increasing by the same magnitude and this increases, what will happen to the overall fraction or the overall value of this thing? To remain constant, because the wages are changing.
Impact.
There won't be any impact. That's why we are saying companies will not respond to any of changes in the price levels in the long run. Why? Because of the flexibility of prices and wage rates, or prices and costs. That's why in the long run we have what? An upward sloping long run aggregate supply, a vertical long run aggregate supply curve. In the short run, when prices increases, we assume that cost will be held constant, there is rigidity of what? Of wages and other costs. As opposed to the long run where we have flexibility. New contracts are now being signed to say, because of this and that, no, let's increase the wages of the people to this much. That's why you find out that in the long run, in the economy, we have a long run aggregate supply that is vertically above the potential level of output, right? So in other words, we are saying price level rises and money wage rate rises by the same percentage, number one, price, okay, in the short run, we say price level rises and the money wage is unchanged, which motivates companies to increase what? Production, right? Here, any production level that falls below the potential GDP, we are operating below what? Full employment. Here, we are operating above full employment. But in the long run, the economy will be, it is assumed that in the long run, the economy will be at its potential. This is theory, right? And remember, theory is not always applicable, or there are some degrees to which we can argue and say, but this is not what we see in the real world. But I'm presenting to you the model. Then we apply it and see how best we can. Right. So I've demonstrated to you the long run aggregate supply. I've demonstrated to you the short run aggregate supply, but let's look at changes in aggregate supply. Right. So, okay. Akisa says, thank you, Doc. It is very clear to me now. Okay. Thank you so much. Right. So now we want to look at the shift. What I've realized when I was doing this class with you guys for the assignment, I noted that sometimes it's better for us to have a model, to understand the model first before we apply it. Because in the assignment discussion, we just go and attack questions without having background of how the model works, because it will take us a lot of time. Right, a hand is up, yeah.
Doc, I just want to find out regarding the changes in prices. When your prices increase, shouldn't the company like cut costs instead of like increasing production? Are you not working at a loss when you increase production?
Okay, so the only way to look at this is to look at the prices of these goods as the price of output that you are producing, right? So if it is now higher, which means it's good news for the company, because now it will be selling at a what? At a higher price. But we are assuming that costs are fixed in the short term. Costs do not change.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you were producing your outputs, which can be shoes or laptops, tablets, which were previously.
May I ask that you give just one more example of the short run aggregated supply, please?
What do you mean by examples, like specifically?
Or maybe just just the description once again, like just for a short one. I just want to make sure that I understand correctly.
Okay, so the only way to look at short run and long run, look at how difficult it is for companies to change wages or to adjust to wages, or for unions, actually labor unions, to push for an increase in wages. Right? In the short run, it's very difficult because there will be signed contracts. Right? So in the short run, even if the prices of commodities are going up everywhere, right? But internally, these companies will be having labor unions will be having a problem in trying to push for higher wages for their employees in the short run, because companies will say we've signed a contract to say people will be earning this much for this whatever period, maybe 1 year or so. Right. So it will become very difficult for them to now say, okay, because of inflation or because prices are continuing to increase, can we increase the wage rate of the employees? Right. So companies will continue to benefit in the short run because they will be selling their output at a higher price, but wages will remain fixed, or wages will be rigid in the short run, or wages or other input costs will be rigid in the short run. But in the long run now, but now your question will be, how long is the long run? There's no specific time to say long run should be maybe 10 months or what. It depends on what we are looking at. But basically, it is the amount of time it takes for structural changes to be made, like maybe changes in the wage rates in companies, right? The moment now wages are changed, the economy, that's when we have a what? The long run.
Can I just mention something and then you confirm that I understand it plus minus correctly? Because I think my mind works in examples. But anyway,
yeah.
So during COVID, when the prices of sanitizers shot up, right? It didn't mean necessarily that. So the output price was much more. So the companies were making more money, which means they produced more. However,
yes,
the price
they
to
moved
make
like
it
maybe in this
in
direction.
terms of the cost was somewhat constant. And that's the short run that you refer to.
Yes.
Okay, no, then I'm fine. Thank you.
Yeah, you look at the companies that were producing those hand sanitizers to say, did they actually increase the wages for their employees?
Not necessarily.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, so that's what we are referring to as the short run. But
Okay,
in the long run,
thanks.
in the long run now you see labor unions coming in and say, no, we have to push for higher wages because these companies are earning a lot of money, something like that. Now there is flexibility in what? In wages or other input cost. That's where now we talk of the long run.
Thank you, Doc. We may move
I will
on.
give you a page reference to read from the main textbook, Parking. Is it 653? But I'll check once we are done with the class. So let's look at the shifts in the aggregate supply curves. So we say a change in the price level changes the quantity of rich GDP supplied, which is a movement along the aggregate supply. You need to be able to distinguish just in a similar way where we looked at movement along a supply curve for a company, right? When you're looking now at aggregate supply curve, changes in the price level will not cause a shift in what? In aggregate supply, but it will cause a movement along. That's why you see that here, we simply moved from allow me to just rub some of these things because now it becomes clustered. Right. So we are talking of a movement along the short and aggregate supply. Why? Because it is due to changes in what? In the price level. No shift here. So there are other factors that causes a shift of the short and aggregate supply curve, either to the left or to the right. So we are talking of the change in the price level, which does not change the aggregate supply, but it causes movement along this aggregate supply. So aggregate supply changes when an influence on production plans, when an influence on production plans other than the price level changes. So what is changing here now is an influence other than the price level. Other factors that affect the price level, other factors that affect production plans other than the price level, because the price level simply causes a movement along the same what? Aggregate supply curve. Right. So if you look at this, you will see that these other factors or these other influences include changes in potential GDP and changes in man wage or in wage rate. I will show you what I'm saying here. These are just examples. Remember, include it means that these are just examples, right? But there are other factors that we can look at. So let's begin by looking at the change in potential GDP. Later on, you see why what we are doing now is important in answering the aggregate supply, aggregate demand framework, aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So looking at the change in potential GDP, remember we said potential GDP, we see it by having a long run aggregate supply curve that is vertically above the potential what? GDP, which you can call YF, you represent full employment level or full level of GDP, full level of employment, GDP at full employment, or whichever way you want to call it, right? So an increase in potential GDP increases both both long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply. For example, if the productive capacity of this economy increases, you find out that the long-run aggregate supply curve will no longer be here, but it will shift to the right, demonstrating that now we have the potential to produce more. So now it's no longer just the long-run aggregate supply curve that is shifting, but it will shift both the short-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve. Let me show you how. Right. So an increase in potential GDP. So the increase in potential GDP is simply shown by a rightward shift in what? In the long-run aggregate supply curve. And the opposite is true. If there is a decrease in potential GDP, you see it by a leftward what? Shift. And there are factors that can cause that to happen. Let's see what can happen for us to experience this. Look at this. Potential GDP can increase for any of the three reasons. Number one, an increase in full employment quantity of labor, right? The larger the quantity of labor employed, the greater is real GDP, right? An example could be an increase in population, not only population, because population might include those that are below 18 years and they are not able to work, right? We are looking at an increase in the labor force participation rate or an increase in the labor force. Can also increase the potential GDP, because now if you have more a higher level of labor force, for example, your potential, your ability to produce higher GDP also increases. So that can be an example also of a shift in potential GDP. Number two, there can be an increase in the quantity of what? Of capital, which includes human capital, the skills that people have acquired in school and through on-the-job training. I've already mentioned this. It increases potential GDP. The word potential is like, we are not saying that is what the economy is producing, but it has the potential to produce that when all resources are fully utilized. There's also an advancement in technology, which causes the long run, both the long run aggregate supply curve to shift to the right. Okay. Right, I wanted to demonstrate something here. Okay. Right, so these are some of the factors that can cause potential GDP. But remember, when potential GDP increases in the economy, it doesn't shift only, it doesn't materialize following a shift of the long run aggregate supply alone. They move together with what? The long run aggregate supply and the short run aggregate supply curve. Okay. So, that being said, I'll now move on to illustrating the change in what? In potential GDP. You can see that initially, the economy potentially was producing this, or this was the full level of employment, 13 trillion US dollars, right? But following a change or an increase in education levels or human capital investments, now people are productive. You find out that the long run aggregate supply, in packing, they call it long run aggregate supply, LAS, but you can call it LRAS, right? Long run aggregate supply curve. So it will shift to the right to LRAS 1 from LRAS 0 to this right. But remember, we had a short run aggregate supply curve initially before this change. So an increase in potential GDP will result in also the short-run aggregate supply curve shifting to a short-run aggregate supply curve 1. I think this is clear, right? So changes in
Doc, sorry
yeah.
to interject. Just so I get clarity, the reason why we would have both the LAS and the SAS is because it will first start in the short term and then ultimately move to the long run. Am I correct to say that?
Okay.
In a sense that in the beginning, we will assess the increase in potential GDP for a short period.
Okay.
And then later on too, we will then assess it in the long run, which would be that vertical line.
Okay. Remember, what brought us here was the idea that what causes shifts in aggregate supply? What causes shifts in aggregate supply? And we've noted that changes in price levels do not have an impact in terms of changes in aggregate supply, or in terms of shifting the aggregate supply curve, right? It's just have an impact on movement along that very same short-run aggregate supply curve, right? So, but then now, when we have any other influence on production plans, for example, your capital investments, your what is this? Capital investment, be it human capital investment or physical capital investment, or an improvement in technology, right? Which means now we will sort of like migrate from whatever we were having here in equilibrium before the change to a new position, because now potentially this economy is now able to produce what? More at this new state. So at this new state, there will be always a corresponding what? Short-run aggregate supply curve that will be corresponding with the new production capacity of this economy. Right. So I think, I know it might look a bit confusing, but let's see. Let's continue progressing, and then you tell me if it's still unclear. Stabizo?
Hi, Doc. I'm just wondering, of course, the assignment we have requires us to explain through using graphs, but in the long run, when we are doing economics, is there a way we can run away from graphs and explain things using like words and paragraphs, or we really need to lock down and understand the graphs for us to be able to pass this course? This includes exams as well. Do we really need to understand the graphs for us to pass the exam?
Definitely you need to. That would be my answer to that question. Definitely you need to. And if we manage to finish this class on time, I will demonstrate the various ways of which you can use to draw these diagrams. So yeah, in economics, of course, there are so many ways of trying to present information. You can use graphs, you can use words, you can use equations or mathematical formulation, but a graph can tell a good story, although you would need to also provide explanation using text. So there's no way of running away from graphs if you want to perform better in this one. Because the moment maybe a marker looks at someone with a graph and someone without, already there's an impression there. Okay. So this is what we have in terms of the shifts when we have a change in potential output. And change in potential output, we said it comes from various sources, right? Various sources: education, training, you have your improvement in technology, an increase in capital accumulation, etc. But you're going to see a lot of policies when you do the assignment for PGT. I will briefly show you how to attempt that question. So, right, remember here I talked of, but I said, right, I said we are looking at changes in aggregate supply. And specifically, I said any other influence that is not the price level will cause the aggregate supply to shift, right? Either to the right or to the left. Okay. So, okay, so now we've looked at one of the aspects whereby I said these other influences include what? Change in potential and change in what? Money wage rate. But money wage rate is just one of the costs. There are other costs as well, which can be maybe rental rate of capital. Because remember, other money wages are just the return for labor, right? It's one factor of production. We are paying for the labor, but you need to pay for capital, you need to pay for rent, you need to pay all those other costs that are involved in business transactions, in production. So we've looked at the change in potential what? GDP, and we've seen that this happens. But what about changes in other prices of other factors of production? By other factors of production, what we have? Maybe it's land, it's capital. Okay, etc. Right? So here I talked of e.g. nominal what? Wage rates, but you can also talk of oil prices. Remember, oil is a what? Is a significant factor of production. Without oil, there's highly likely to be disaster in the economy. So that's why you see when oil prices increase, you need to understand how does that affect the economy using ATAS framework. Right. So when the price of any of the factors of production changes, the short-run aggregate supply changes, right? I hope you understand my notation here. This delta is simply short for change, right? So I'm saying here, when the price of any of the factors of production changes, the short-run aggregate supply changes, but the long-run aggregate supply does not change. So what causes the long-run aggregate supply curve to change is actually change in potential output. When prices of other factors of production like rental rate of capital or the rent that you pay for your buildings, that would cause a short-run aggregate supply to change, either to the right or to the left. So let's consider an increase in what? In money wages or oil prices. So an increase in the money wage, which is nominal wage, or oil price, we are talking of an increase in what? Money wage or oil price, reduces short-run aggregate supply because it increases the firm's what? Cost. Right. Hey, thank you so much for the contribution, because remember, oil is oil, coal, even electricity, they are all energy products, right? So they are categorized in the same, they affect the economy almost in a similar way, right? So we are saying an increase in money wage or oil price reduces short-run aggregate supply because it increases firm's cost. Here it's not just one firm, right? It's firm's cost, which means aggregate level. All companies are affected following an increase in nominal wage rates. So when there is an increase in nominal wage rate, does the short-run aggregate supply curve shift to the left or to the right? Okay, yeah, that was a question.
Left.
It goes to the left. Yes. So it shifts. So whatever principles that we've learned in microeconomics, most of them they apply here in macro, but now it's happening at an aggregated level, not at an individualistic or in an individual markets. Now it's an aggregated level. So if you look at this, I hope my diagram is clear, or maybe need to. Okay, can you see what I'm drawing here? I'm just trying to illustrate. So here you have your GDP, real GDP. Here you have your price level. This is your short run aggregate supply curve, 0. When there is an increase in nominal wage rates, the short run aggregate supply shifts to the left from short run aggregate supply 0 to short run aggregate supply what? 1. So if you draw a horizontal line here, you will see that at each price level now, because the short run aggregate supply curve has shifted to the left, now less is now what? Being produced when you compare it from at the original level of short run aggregate supply. So you can see that this will be a reduction in what? In supply when it shifts to the left. When it shifts to the right, you can already see that there's an increase in what? In production. And it shifts to the right when there is a decrease in nominal what? Wages, or when the oil prices falls. When the coal price falls, electricity tariffs, when they fall, there is likely to be an increase in short run aggregate supply. Or companies will respond to this by increasing their production because now they are able to produce more output. Is that a question? Okay. Yeah, so. Okay, can you please mute our microphones unless we have a question so that we don't get distracted? Okay, thank you. So we are talking of an increase in other price of other factors of production. And I've just mentioned here oil prices. I've mentioned price of factors of production like labor. We can talk of coal, we can talk of electricity. So you'll find a question that will say, the price of electricity in South Africa has been on the rise ever since, I don't know, as our memory recalls. Then what is the likely effect of this increase in the energy prices to the South African economy? Already you know that electricity is a key input in almost every production process in South Africa. Therefore, an increase in what? In oil prices or electricity will cause companies to experience higher production costs, which causes the short run aggregate supply to shift to the left, right? Meaning less output will be produced as companies cut production. Okay, so with higher production costs, the quantity that firms, with higher production costs, the quantity that firms are willing to supply at each price level decreases. That's why I've shown you something like this to say this is your output, real GDP, this is your prices, and this is your aggregate short run aggregate supply 1 or 0, and then this is your short run aggregate supply what? 1. And at each price level, if I draw horizontal lines, I'm representing price levels, right? So at this price level, you can see at the new supply aggregate supply curve, less output is now produced. At this, if you compare maybe at a higher price, this was the initial and this is the new. You see that less output is now at each what? Price level. Right. So you can find out that this causes, I was just trying to not to densely populate my slides. So this implies that, or this will lead to a leftward what? Shift of the aggregate supply curve. Actually, this is not that just aggregate supply curve, but it's what? Short run aggregate supply. Remember we said when prices of other inputs change, they don't change the long run aggregate supply curve. No, they change the what? The short run. So why? Okay, so a change in the money wage does not change the what? The long run aggregate supply curve. Why? The long run aggregate supply curve
is not affected by price.
Yes. So the change in the man wage is accompanied by an equal change in what? If you consider a long run, so let's say, okay, maybe there was a missing word. I don't know if what I've written here is correct. So why the long run, on the long run aggregate supply curve, the change in man wage, remember we're looking at change in nominal wage, right? Which is the same as man wage, is accompanied by an equal percentage change in price level, which means now we will still remain on that vertical line without companies responding to anything, because in the long run, both wage rates, price levels, they change by equal proportions. Because remember, that's where your labor unions argue to say inflation has increased by 2%, so therefore wage rates, nominal wage rates also have to increase by 2%. So firms will not be moved by that. That's why we're saying changes in cost of production don't affect the what? The short run, the long run aggregate supply curve. So with no change in relative prices, firms have no incentive to change production, and real GDP remains constant at the potential level of GDP. Recall that what we said here. Recall what we said on the first bullet point on the slide that I'm having. Okay. We said that when the price level change of the on any of the factors of production changes, short run aggregate supply is the one that is what? Affected, but not I hope we can understand. Right, so that is it. Any questions so far? No questions. So this is the representation of what I was talking about. A rise in man wage or nominal wages leads to companies reducing their short run aggregate supply, reducing their production levels, right, in the short run, which means they will shift to the left. And when production shifts to the left, from here to here, you'll find out that in the short run aggregate supply curve is the one that is affected. Therefore, because we said that when wage rates changes, the long run aggregate supply curve is not what? Affected. And if it's not affected to remain here, what will change is simply the short run aggregate supply curve, and it will shift to the left because of the increase in what? In production cost. So in other words, okay.
Doc,
yeah.
I have a question. If in the long run, the change in this shift from aggregate supply from 0 to 2 in this case, you say that it's not impacted by the wage rate. How then are companies supposed to be sustainable? If they cannot increase their output and the wage rate increases, how are they then sustainable in the long run?
Okay, remember we talked in the long run about flexibility of prices. Short run, there is rigidity of prices. In the long run, if there is an increase in the wage rate, it will be accompanied by an equivalent increase in the prices also. So there will be an equal increase in prices. So that's why we said firms are not even worried about that. Why? Because if we are talking of W over P, which is the real wage, right? So we said nominal wages increased by maybe 10%. The price level also increased by 10%. So it's like nothing has happened. Does that make sense to you? So this increase in the price level will be matched by exactly a same increase in the what? In the wage rates in the long run. That's why firms will not increase production. Clear or not?
It's not.
It's not clear. So may I ask, why did you say shifts the long run aggregate supply curve? Can you maybe, yeah.
I think it will become clearer more when you illustrate us how the long run aggregate supply curve moves, the LAS.
You saying it will become clear when I do what?
Show us how the LAS move the long run.
Okay. Anyone who is getting what Gerald is saying, because
so you showed us now how the SAS moves, but you haven't showed us yet how the LAS move because of the SAS.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. May you please explain to us how the long run the curve moves?
That's what I'm waiting to see as well.
Okay, but this one I'm sure we've done already for the long run aggregate supply. It's the first one that we started with.
Yes, it's the first one. Yes, that one. Can you just briefly go back and explain again, please?
Okay,
just the long run.
This takes us back to this slide, whereby I was saying that an increase in potential GDP increases both the long run aggregate supply curve and short run aggregate supply curve. An increase in the potential GDP increases both long run aggregate supply curve. Oh, this is a repetition of the same point, right? So potential GDP can increase for any of the three reasons. One, full employment quantity of labor increases. We talked of an increase in the labor force in the economy. It increases the potential of this economy to produce 13 trillion to what? 14 trillion in the long run. Number two, increase in the quantity of capital. Investment in capital, skills that people have acquired in school and through on-the-job training, advancement in technology. All these factors, they cause a shift here from this level of potential GDP to 14. So whenever there is always a change in potential GDP in the economy, the long run aggregate supply curve doesn't go alone. It goes with the short run aggregate supply. So maybe it will be clearer when I apply it to the question that we have in your assignment, right? I don't know. Must I move on?
Doc,
yeah.
Sorry, I think what Lydia was asking is with regards to the shifting being to the left in the short run. To say that since the price level increases, but we have a reduction in the production, isn't it that an organization would then run at a loss? But I think the confusion is with, and also I stand to be corrected, is with regards to the actual short run aggregate supply curve, to say that is not necessarily the price. That is what do we call this? It's kind of like a measure of the supply. So it's not necessarily wages only, for example, as you mentioned. So the fact that we are now on point B, it does not necessarily mean that our wages are at B. I don't know if I make sense.
Yeah, wages are not in this diagram.
Yes. So wages
are out of the picture.
An underlying, yes, okay.
Yeah. It's an underlying factor that we can't present in this diagram, because this is not a labor market. This is an output market. So what we can only put is the output level and the price of that output. So labor, we are talking of it, labor prices or wages, we are talking of them. They are in their own market there, but we are just bringing it here because it has got an impact on production. There's a comment there from, I think it's very important that I read it through, I think it's Modishanish, says, okay, thank you. So the long run aggregate supply movement is nothing to do with the prices and wage increase. Yes, this is what we said initially to say, when the price of any of the factors of production changes, the short run aggregate supply changes, but the long run aggregate supply does not change. What changes the long run aggregate supply is some of the factors that we've talked about here. Labor, quantity of labor force, or the labor that we have in the economy, quantity of capital, advancement in technology. But I'm saying there are a lot. The question that deals with the supply side of the economy, that's why I said, let's understand this framework first. So that when you are asked a question about supply-sided policy, there are demand-sided policies also, which you need to understand. But for the purpose of the assignment, you need to understand the supply side of the economy, whereby we're saying, how can we stimulate the productive capacity of the economy? We have long run what? Economic growth. Right. So this is what we have. Right. So we are done with the shifts of the aggregate. Remember here, I just talked about an increase in what? In wages, but you can talk of a decrease also, right? And I'm sure you can do that. Instead of having a shift to the left like this, it will be what? Maybe 3. And you can see that when oil prices decrease, right? Companies will find it, they will take it to their advantage because it's now less costly to produce output. So therefore, the short and aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. And this will be measured by an equivalent decrease in what? In the price level. So an increase in wages or oil price is inflationary because it leads to increase in what? In price levels in the economy. This one is somehow deflationary, or it leads to a reduction in what? These levels in the economy. Okay, let me not jump ahead of myself, but I'm sure you can all do the opposite of what we did here. An increase in oil price, an increase in coal price, an increase in any other input price that is used in the economy at an aggregated level. Let's look at aggregate demand. Let's go back. Remember, I said I want to touch on aggregate supply separately. I want to touch on aggregate demand separately. Then I'll bring the two pieces together in the same diagram so that you know that, okay, so when I see the aggregate supply curve sloping upward, I know why is it like that. And when I see a vertical long run aggregate supply, I know what's happening. When I see a downward sloping aggregate demand curve, I know what is happening. So the quantity of real GDP, which is Y, this is real GDP or income, is the sum of real consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure. Stabiso?
Hey, Doc. So some of us didn't like doing the postgrad diploma.
Yeah.
We never really were, like, we came from other disciplines, and this is like the first time we're seeing this. And I'm here, and I promise you I'm lost, and I'm hoping I will find myself some other time.
Okay.
How do we pick ourselves up, and where do we go to find like what you're talking about? So I understand 100 people are here and my being lost, and I'm like, okay, tomorrow I can read much about it. But where do I start? Because as much as you are talking, I was in the school, both of them, this wasn't talked about. The assignment, I don't know what you're talking about here, actually answers the assignment that I've got. So my question is, where do I start tomorrow after this lecture? Like, where do I go? Like, I'm
specifically for this framework.
Like for my assignment, to be fair, I want the assignment first as a postgrad diploma, and because we have an economics assignment too. And also I'm asking for exams, where do I go? Because in both the schools that we have been in, we really didn't do much about all the graphs you're talking about. So I'm really struggling right now. And is there textbook? I know the textbook is there, but it doesn't speak to it as much as you are speaking to it. So how do I find myself, because I'm struggling and I'm lost, but I don't want to take the class with me, but I just want to know what resources can I use to be able to like understand what you're teaching us today.
Okay, all right. In answering your question, there are a lot of resources that you can use. Number one, I don't know if you attended the assignment class that we had for this assignment specific. You did?
Yes.
Okay, number one, that is one way of dealing with that. And if those resources were not like getting you to where you want to be, right? I will also give you page references from the textbook, right? That is ManQ, which speaks exactly the same language that I'm talking, not ManQ, sorry. It's parking. It's parking. I'll give you page references. Oh, there's parking. Right. We did the assignment discussion and we're covering, I think, we covered all the questions and trying to give you some of the references. Then option number 3, if the two are not like getting you exactly what you want, maybe we might need to have a one-on-one whereby you need to understand, but given the time frame that we have, maybe it might be difficult to do that. But maybe we should try a one-on-one, which could be yet another option as well. But textbook references, there is also the assignment discussion that we had in the video that we did try to show you the information. Yes, there's a hand up.
Hello, Dr. Wells.
Yes.
Yeah, I think another, maybe the fourth option, maybe she gonna inbox now, then we're gonna talk about those recorded sessions. I think it's gonna help because it was from the introduction, like from what is economics until we introduce all these concepts. So I think it will be another, if a fourth alternative that's gonna be useful again in this scenario. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think you got some of the options that might help to navigate the assignment. Okay. Should we move on? All right, I think so. So we are talking of aggregate demand as the quantity of real GDP demanded as the sum of real consumption, investment, government expenditure, and exports minus imports. That's why, therefore, we have this income identity whereby we say income is equals to consumption plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. And I said in our previous class that for us to get the total value of goods in the economy, we need to find how much did consumers spend on goods, how much did firms invest in their productions or in buying assets, how much did the government consume, how much did we earn in terms of our exports, and how much did we spend through imports? Because when you are importing, you are spending, right? So it's income flowing out of South Africa. That's why it is subtracted from this. But in other words, aggregate demand is the same as income, which is the same as consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. Right. So this equation is really important when you are analyzing policy decisions that can be taken by the government. So why is the total amount of final goods and services produced in South Africa that people, businesses, governments, and foreigners plan to buy? Right? People, we have consumption. Businesses, that's your investment. Government, that's your G. Foreigners, your exports. And imports, it's people again buying from abroad, right? So many factors affect these buying plans. And some of them are the price level, number one. what happens if the price level increases, right? Does aggregate demand increase or it falls? Expectations. If we expect the price level to increase in future or next year, or we expect inflation next year, what happens to aggregate demand today? Do people buy more of these goods and commodities today, or they'll buy less of them? Because remember, when there's inflation in future, people are likely to buy more today. Take it from this idea that when there's an announcement of an increase in oil price, sorry, it's fuel, petrol or diesel, tomorrow, people will fill in more today. Those are expectations because they know that they expect the price to increase tomorrow, so they'll buy more today. So we also have fiscal policy and monetary policy. We'll touch on this as well if the time allows. The world economy, on the world economy, this is where we talk of the exchange rate. The exchange rate also has an impact on aggregate demand because the exchange rate, the South African exchange rate, determines how much commodities are we going to export, how much are we going to import. So you might need to understand the effect of an increase in the exchange rate, the effect of a decrease in the exchange rate. But mainly in our case, I would dwell much on the fiscal policy and the monetary policy briefly to just show you. So let's first analyze the relationship between the price level holding all the other factors what? Constant. Right. So we will hold all the other factors constant and analyze so this is the aggregate demand curve, and it is downward sloping, which indicates that as the price level falls in the economy, right, as the price level falls from there to there, aggregate demand in the economy increases from, for example, 12 trillion US dollars to 12.5 trillion US dollars. Why is it like that? There are several reasons to explain that. Okay? Because remember, when the price level falls, I will take it from a micro level. The only way to understand macro economics is to take it at a micro level. Then you aggregate it, consider that same thing happening to everyone in the economy. Let's take the price of let's say petrol. You are demanding petrol as an individual, right, or as an individual company. Okay, no, let me say price of pizza, for example. Let's talk of the price of pizza, right? So the price of pizza falls. When the price of pizza falls, right, to an individual, they are now able to buy more of those pizza, right? Why? Because now they feel more wealthier, because now they are able to buy even more of the goods and services. So a decrease in the price level from this to this will cause an increase in purchasing power. What is purchasing power? This is the number of goods that you can buy given a certain level of income, right? So if we say, for example, you had your income, nominal income, 100 rands, but the price level was 5. Price level, remember, is the average price of all the goods, right? So the number of, let's say, pizza that you buy, assuming that the economy is just having pizza only, you would buy how many commodities? You know that you do your mathematics there, you buy 20 pizza. So this is the purchasing power, the amount of goods that you buy. But if the price level falls, instead of having 5 rand, now we have what? 4 rand, which means instead of buying 20 pizza, now you buy how many? 25. So this is an increase in purchasing power. That is what we are talking. So that's why you see that when there is a decline in the aggregate or in the price level, aggregate demand in the entire economy, because remember here we're looking at one individual, but there are a lot of individuals in the economy which will be behaving in the similar way like this guy is doing, which implies that at an aggregated level, a decline in the price level will lead to an expanded demand in the entire economy. Okay? So as the price level continues to fall, aggregate demand will be increasing. So, but why does the aggregate demand slopes downwards when the price level rises? For example, now we are talking the opposite, but other things remain constant. Remember, I was talking of a price decrease. Now it's a price increase, but other things remain the same. Real wealth decreases. When it's a price decrease, it's an opposite, right? Then real wealth will increase, right? Okay, let's ignore that. But I know I'm just doing this so that you see what you are trying to do. So when the price level rises, holding all the other things constant, real wealth decreases. Why? Because of the fall in purchasing power. Why? There's a decline in purchasing power. Take that pizza example. Purchasing power. Right. How much commodities or how many commodities are you able to buy following a price increase? Obviously, it will be less. Right. So when real wealth is but amount of wealth measured in terms of the goods and services that the money, bonds, or stocks will buy. Remember, wealth. When we have, if you're an individual, you have bought stocks, that would be part of your wealth, right? You can easily sell those stocks and get income, then you can buy commodities. If you have bonds, you can redeem the bond. If you have income or money, cash, or in the bank, wherever. So we are summing all these sources as your income or as your wealth, actually. It's an aggregation of all your net worth. So now you are able to buy less because of an increase in the price level. So if the price level rises, real wealth decreases. People then try to restore their wealth. How do they restore their wealth? By reducing demand. So they increase savings and lower what? Current consumption. Right. It's quite common sense that when inflation hits, right? Or okay, when price levels increases, if you were buying maybe let's say clothes on a monthly basis, right? Now you see that hey, things are getting tougher and tougher. You are going to cut back on some of the budget allocations that we're assigning to clothes or assigning to holidays or any other expenditure that you can think of. So that's why we say aggregate demand in summary is equals to consumption plus investment. Why consumption? Because when the price level increases, people are likely to cut back on consumption, right? Which reduces aggregate demand in the economy. So savings increases to increase future consumption. That's how people behave on average, right? This is on average, but we know people are different. Some, they even increase consumption when prices are going up, okay? Right, so changing aggregate demand, right? We have a hand that is up.
Doc, I just wanted to ask, I think I got a bit confused with regards to, for example, when the price level like goes up, and then we increased investment, because how I'm then seeing it is that with regards to our aggregate demand, which is our Y in the formula that has been provided, it's just a shift from consumption to investment, which then kind of does not necessarily show the impact.
Okay.
So I think my question would be, is it that there would be reduction in demand, aggregate demand, therefore reducing the total consumption, but also not leaving as much for investment?
Okay. It's a very good aspect that you have raised, because we have aggregate demand being equal to consumption plus investment plus our, okay, let's end there. Let's just assume that we have an economy in this case, right? So when you're looking at consumption and investment here, we are saying that when there is an increase in the price level, which causes people to cut back on their current consumption, and when they cut back on their consumption, they are likely to increase their savings, right? right? But having savings and having actual investment, somehow they are two different things, right? Because we can have a lot of savings which are not invested. Does that make sense? Of course, we get investment from savings, right? But now it will be a matter of, are the companies willing to invest in the economy given the increase in the price level? So I'm just trying to show you that even if we have a reduction in consumption and an increase in savings, that have an impact on the current level of consumption, such that people are switching between savings and spending. That's why we say that aggregate demand currently falls. So now whether now investment increases or not depends on the willingness of companies to invest. Because there's a case whereby we have a lot of savings as an economy, but companies are not investing. Okay, I hope it clears the confusion.
It does. Thank you, Doc.
Okay, so now let's look at changes in what? In aggregate demand. By changes in aggregate demand, we are looking at the main factors that causes shift. Remember, we started with the price level. That's why you saw it's a movement along the same demand curve. But any other factor that affects aggregate demand other than the price, expectations, fiscal and monetary policy, I would refer. That's why I was saying, if you want to read more about this chapter, just visit page 653. Around this page, maybe you can start the whole chapter if you are interested, right? Of packing it all and look at this page and read for interest sake regarding how expectations cause an increase in aggregate demand or a decrease in aggregate demand. How does fiscal policy and monetary policy affect the economy? How does the world economy? And I said world economy, this is whereby we are looking at our exchange rate. Or we are also looking at foreign income or GDP in other nations. Do you know that when one country is doing well, if your trading partner is doing well in terms of GDP, it can be good news for you, because now when that country is growing, you might have an opportunity to export your commodity to that nation because you have a market because of rising incomes, right? So foreign income or foreign GDP can be also a determinant in the South African context. Because remember, countries do not operate in a vacuum. They do operate in other nations. Okay, they do operate in an environment that is populated by other countries. So here we have a decrease in aggregate demand, we have an increase in aggregate demand. So which means for every price level that we are talking of, if there's an increase, okay, let's talk of a decrease first. So this was our original what? Aggregate demand, and then there is a reduction in AD. How does the aggregate demand fall? Go back to the formula: investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. So if consumption falls, if investment falls, or if any of these components falls, it is highly likely that our aggregate demand will also fall, which means at each price level, now we have less output produced. But if it's an increase, therefore, it means that at each price level, whether it's here or it's above there, you'll find out that more is now being produced. And there are various ways through aggregate demand can be stimulated in the economy. Through fiscal policy. I don't want to dwell much on this, but there's a question for MBA students. Fiscal policy. I hope the time will allow me to go through the questions to show you. Now that we have the foundation of the aggregate demand, aggregate supply framework, we can now apply them in the assignment, right? Fiscal policy, monetary policy. There are other policies that can be done, like the exchange rate policy. I don't want to touch on those ones. Right. On the monetary policy, the main tools, or the main tool that is used by the South African Reserve Bank is the repo rate. By the repo rate, we refer to the rate at which commercial banks borrow from the central bank. So commercial banks borrow from the central bank right? When they borrow now, they extend loans to the general public or to the companies at a prime lending rate, which is different from the repo rate. So the repo rate, let's say currently, I think it's around, is it not 7.5 or so? But you can check, right, the repo rate. So it's like, take it in this way if you want to understand the repo rate better. You have, you know, someone who is lending money, and you know someone, let's call that person A, they are lending money, but they don't have a market for lending that money. Let's say, I'm not saying this is actually the same that happens in the economy, but I'm giving an example so that you understand. So there's another person B who is also looking for funds, but they don't know where to get them. So we have an intermediary C who would go to A, get the funds at the repo rate, then they extend the loans to B, who is looking for funds at the prime lending rate. This is what banks do, right? So they borrow from the central bank, they use the money to extend loans to the public at a what? At a higher interest rate. So that's why the repo rate and the prime lending rate or the interest rate, there is a high correlation, because when the repo rate is increased by the central bank, also banks will respond by increasing their interest rate. That's why you find out that people will cry when the repo rate is increased by the central bank, because now they have to pay more for their bonds. If you have a home loan, if you have an automobile loan, an increase in the repo rate means that now it's costly for you to service your debt. Right. Anyway, it's something that we'll discuss later on, but you will understand this as we go. Right. So this is what we have in terms of changes in aggregate demand. Right. I have I forgot to put, okay, let's call this a summary. In aggregate demand, right? This is a summary of the changes in aggregate demand. Yes, there's a hand up.
Doc, I just wanted to ask, with the fiscal policy, would it be correct to link it more to government spending, since the fiscal policy is driven by national treasury?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I almost forgot to highlight about the fiscal policy. I just concentrated on the monetary policy. Okay, thank you for highlighting that. Fiscal policy now, whenever you hear about fiscal policy, there are two things that should come into your mind. Number one, it's taxation. Number two is government expenditure. And how is this done? By the presentation of the budget by the finance minister. So this is under the national what? Treasury. The fiscal policy. Monetary policy is under the central bank, which is the South African Reserve what? Bank. That is the one that is responsible for conducting the monetary policy. So what is taxation? This is what we know. This is the source of government revenue, right? This is one source of through which government collects its revenue, right? And then it collects revenue and then it spends the revenue. So that's why we're saying now when we are looking at fiscal policy, we are centrally looking at and taxation. Okay. So I think we are going to have revision classes whereby we look at past exam papers, how you should respond to them. If you are faced with a question on monetary policy, faced with a question with the fiscal policy, how do you deal with that? It's very simple, as you are going to see. All right. So here we have the aggregate demand and the various ways through which it can increase. If you have expected future income in the economy, inflation, or profit decreases, right? Which means your aggregate demand currently will decrease. Why? Because if you expect to receive more income in future, you will reduce your demand now, okay, and increase it later. If there is, you expect future inflation, right? Wait, we are talking of aggregate demand decreases if this happens. Aggregate demand increases if this happens. So here we are talking of aggregate demand falling if we expect, so here we didn't specify whether it's an increase in inflation, it's an increase in income or a decrease in income. So now you need to know whether does aggregate demand fall when we expect higher income or we expect lower income, right? I will explain that. Fiscal policy decreases government spending, government expenditure, increases taxes, or decreases transfer payments. All this is what we refer to as contractionary fiscal policy. Why is it? The same applies as long as it decreases aggregate demand, whether it's a monetary policy or it's a fiscal policy, we call it contractionary fiscal or monetary policy. Why? Because we are trying to contract the economy. We are trying to slow down the economy. Maybe the economy is moving very fast. So there are things that you can do as a government to control. Maybe inflation is rising too fast. So you need to have a contractionary fiscal policy or a contractionary monetary policy. Right. On the other hand, here, we have fiscal policy and monetary policy. This is expansionary as opposed to what? Contractionary. Why is it expansionary? Because we want to expand the economy. We want to stimulate aggregate demand. We want to increase aggregate demand. How do we do that? Right? We increase government expenditure. How? Through public programs like construction, public roads, public networks, etc., or anything that increases government expenditure, like maybe transfer payments. You have your child grants, right? Government can increase child grants, make sure that people have income to spend. We are trying to promote aggregate demand in the economy. But when you reduce them here, it's a contractionary monetary policy. Right. So thank you. Let's move on to the aspect that is important here. Why we are here, right? The short-run equilibrium. This is what we have, right? Whereby we are bringing the aggregate short-run aggregate supply and the aggregate short-run aggregate supply and the aggregate demand together to generate an equilibrium in the economy, right? And then the long run now, a long-run equilibrium occurs when we have both the aggregate demand, the short-run aggregate supply curve, the long-run aggregate supply curve intersecting at the same point, right? So short-run macroeconomic equilibrium occurs when real GDP demanded equals real GDP supplied at the intersection of the aggregate demand curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve, right? So this can be called a short-run equilibrium because it shows us where the short-run aggregate supply and the aggregate demand curve intersect, right? This is the long run because all three curves are intersecting. Long run macroeconomic equilibrium, real GDP equals to its potential, right? This is where we are. Right, so we're almost done. Now let's look at the assignment questions. I have embedded PBA 4801, question 3, which talks about using the ADAS model. Discuss the alternative supply side policies that can be implemented to stimulate the economy. You see, the idea here is to stimulate the economy of a developing nation. Right. So this will take us to something like this. Just hold on a bit while I navigate. We have two groups here, MBA. So I briefly try to touch on this because we've done this already. But some of you didn't know where the background of all this is. So I've given you the enough background to understand the models. Okay. All right, just hold on. Okay, so this is what we have. Right, I'll go straight to question 3. Can you see the screen that I'm sharing now? Or you're still seeing the previous one?
We still see the previous
We're
one.
still on the previous one.
Previous one. Okay, so let me stop sharing the one and then show the other one. Is it fine now?
Yes, you're seeing
Okay.
question.
All right, so now I'm attempting the first part, which says using the ADS, discuss alternative supply side policies that can be implemented to stimulate the economy of a developing nation, right? So I talked about whatever is happening on the ADS framework, which is what we've already done, right? I'm sure now you understand what's going on. And then supply side policies themselves, what are they? Supply side policies are a set of macroeconomic policies that aim to increase the productive capacity of an economy and shift the aggregate supply curve to the right. So this results in long-term economic growth and stability. Remember, it's long-term economic growth, which means most of these supply-side policies, they shift both the short run and the long run aggregate supply curve. Here, I've given you a list of some of these policies that we have discussed already about education and training, which is human capital development. So you can take that. But then how do you expand on this? Because I didn't expand it for you, but you can go on Google and then try to search for articles that talks about human capital development and economic growth. Right? You will see the mechanisms through which, how does human capital development affect economic growth? That will be the reasoning that we'll be using in explaining this diagram. A diagram like this. Because if you put a diagram like this and then you don't show like explanation of saying what's happening, because remember, this will be our initial equilibrium, right? When we assume that the economy was in the long run equilibrium with prices P1 and output or real GDP Y1. Following the implementation of various supply-side policies, which causes the short-run aggregate supply and the long-run aggregate supply curve to shift to the right, to Y2, right? This leads to a reduction in the what? In the price level and an increase in production. This is the summary, because remember this diagram, you can put it at the end of, after explaining these supply side policies. Remember, you can't include all of them, right? But you pick the ones that you are comfortable with in terms of explanations, right? So let's maybe say I am focusing on education and training, right? Let me show you something. Okay, just hold on. But do you see the picture that you are supposed to paint here? Can I get a confirmation regarding?
Yes, I can see it on my side.
Okay. I want to show you something here. Because I've noted that maybe some people, they struggle in terms of finding out articles to use in their researches, right? So let's say, for example, I want to find articles that are related to the impact of human capital development or human capital investment on what? On economic growth. Because remember, in research, you would need to be able to demonstrate your ability to conduct what? Unsupervised research, right? So this is what I did, right? I want to know, because when you just go on Google and maybe try to find out various supply-side policies, you get a lot of points, and I can't exhaust them here. But now you need to know, how does it work? How does human capital investment affect growth, right? If you want, you can put PDF at the end so that maybe you can get articles that are actually. So now maybe, for example, you look at this one. I'm sure you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So now you go, remember when you're reading these articles, you don't read everything. You just read the abstract and see if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, then forget about it. Right. Right. You see, these are the points that you'll be looking for. Increased investment in education is shown to lead to higher productivity and earnings for the individuals. And similarly, such investments result in significant social rates of return. And then you substantiate your argument based on these guys. And if you want to cite this, I've shown you already, you copy this title and then you put it on Google what Scholar, and then it will give you everything done for you. But by just looking at the abstract, already you have this point, but it's just a point. Maybe you need to read further now to go back inside and check, okay, the role of education. What are they saying in actual sense? So I have given you a hint regarding how you can explain education and training. That is human capital development. Because remember, you want to demonstrate that how we end up having increased growth. How do we end up having increased what? Sorry. How do we end up having something like this? From year to year. This is sustained economic growth in the long run. Investment in what? Education, training of workers, and stuff like that. And then you are done with this paper, but this is just one paper, and you can't write an entire assignment based on one argument or one source. You need to find another one. Role of human capital in economic growth, and then you do that. You see what this guy is saying. Maybe he's finding different results which contradicts what you have already found. This is it demonstrates a higher degree of what? Of being able to write a very, very, very strong article. It's different from someone who is just writing these bullet points that I've given you. Remember, I said in class, when we do these classes, right? We can't. I can't show you all the points. I just list for you to say, okay, this is what we have. I have investment in infrastructure. So you need to find articles that support this proposition. Okay, if you say investment in infrastructure, how does it affect growth? What are the channels through which investment affect growth? So you find various articles, then you try to critique them. You read this one, you find it's saying this, you read another one, maybe it's complementing what you've read before. And then you conclude and say, okay, overall, this is what is happening. Then you put your diagram. You say, whatever you're explaining here in terms of supply side policies, this is what we have. But basically, you know that healthcare investment or investment in healthcare improves the quality of health of workers or of professionals. When they are healthy, they are likely to be more productive. You see, it's a hypothesis which you can find now to supporting arguments from literature to say, what does the literature say regarding investment in healthcare? Simple. So it's quite surprising that, not surprising because we are all learning, right? But it will be shocking to have an assignment that doesn't have, maybe you write an entire paragraph or 3-4 paragraphs without referring to any source. You know, it's become suspicious. All right, we are done with this part. Right, so I've given you these points, but you can find more and explain them based on literature. Right, let's look at the other question, which is MBA. So conducting research is something that would be interesting once you know what you are supposed to do. Right. So this is the MBA. I think it's question 1. Right. Question 1. What is the question first? Right. The question is B here that says the SARB interest rates increased from 4% to 4.5% between 27th of January 2022 to 24th of March 2022. What impact does this increase have on the borrowers and on wages? That's why I combined MBA and MBO, because you can also find a question like this even at PGD level. It's not something that is quite surprising. But what are we saying here? you need to know the channels through which, through which the interest rate or the repo rate affect the economy. Okay, right. In terms of the borrower, you know that when you are a borrower and the interest rates are increased, it means it's now costly for you to borrow or to service your debt. And that, if that is the case, it means that you are likely to cut back on your consumption level. Companies are also going to cut back on their investment levels. So now we go back to our equation, whereby we were talking of, let me stop sharing just to show you. Right, so we know that when the repo rate is increased, it leads to an increase in cost of borrowing, right? When the cost of borrowing increases, it means that consumers will cut back on consumption, because there are people who borrow to consume, right? They borrow to buy cars, they borrow to buy property, like household property, like, you know, your refrigerators, your etc. So when the repo rate is increased, banks will also increase their interest rate. When the interest rates are increased, people will reduce their consumption levels. Investors, like your companies, will cut back on their investment expenditures, which results, remember, we have AD being equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. So when consumption and investment are falling, it means aggregate demand is also falling. Therefore, you can come up with something like, for example, this is your aggregate supply, but it's short run, right? This is your aggregate demand. And if aggregate demand is falling, you know what is happening to the economy. From Y what? 0 to Y1. P1, P0. Simple. So then how, but then this is just something that I'm telling you out of my mind, right? But you can't write in an assignment just using the words that I'm saying. You need now to go and search for articles that would support whatever you have or whatever you've gathered from a textbook. So you need to go and say the impact of maybe an increase in interest rates on borrowers, or the impact of an increase in the repo rate on investment or on consumption or on exports or imports, because you are dealing with each of these elements. Do we have any question? Any question? Okay, so if we don't have any question, yeah.
Just out of curiosity here, on the monetary policy, would I be right in thinking that the governor of the Reserve Bank, or the MPC, would increase the interest rate in order to curb the inflation rate? What would be your take on that, really, to understand it in a good way? Because sometimes it doesn't make sense. For me, it's like it makes it more and more for things to be affordable, especially with the recent interest rate hikes. Do you ever say in that?
Okay. If I may try to understand what you are saying. You are saying, okay, can you try to come back again so that I can just compile a complete answer for that?
No, I was just saying, the idea is to stimulate the economy, right? I mean,
by reducing the interest rates, right? Or the repo rate.
Yes.
Yes.
But now, of course, given the higher inflation rate, if the MPC continues to increase the interest rate, how is this really helpful in reality? Yeah. Because then things become unaffordable, and just difficult.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I would refer you to the website of SARB, and you would be welcome with a message that would say the primary mandate of the SARB is price stability. The primary goal of the SARB is to maintain price stability, which is low and stable inflation. So whenever the central bank sees that inflation is now getting out of hand, for example, the SARB jointly together with the National Treasury sets the inflation target between 3% and 6% currently. This is what they aim to achieve, to say inflation rate should be between this range. If it gets out of this range to 7%, like what was happening recently, they will increase the repo rate, even if it will hurt the economy, because their primary mandate is to maintain price stability in the economy. There are other secondary objectives, such as employment creation. And maybe economic growth, etc. But the central bank says it is mainly concerned about price stability. Then when it maintains price stability, then it will move on to other objectives. So it might not make sense, but that's what it is.
So assuming that when the interest rates are going high like that, I think we look at it from a perspective of us that already have the debt that we have in a form of home loans and cars, right? But new buyers in the market will then not spend on buying new vehicles and new houses and would rather save that money. Is that the logic around it?
That's very true.
Okay.
That's very true, because they will cut back on their expenditures because they can't now afford to continue in that manner. Right. There's a question for MBA. Should we have two ADAS models, one for borrower and one for wage? No. ADAS to be just one. But if you want to include the market for the labor market, you draw the demand and supply for labor and say when the repo rate is increased, it becomes very expensive for companies to produce output, right? And when they try to cut back on output, they will lay off some workers. And when they lay off some workers, you know that it's like they are reducing the demand for labor, right? And the reduction in demand for labor leads to a fall in wage rate. That would be it in terms of the other part of it. Any other question? Okay. All right. If there are no further questions, I think I will need to announce that these are some of the dates that we might need to take off for those that are interested in doing these classes. Do we get the slides? The slides will be shared to everyone because this was a free class. So we have 4008 on this date, 26 April. We also have 4006 is 2 May. And then we have MBA 5901. This is a retake because of the glitches that the class had previously. And then 4007, it will be on Saturday, April. Exam preparation session. These are quite important, and that's why I highlighted them, because we would want to demonstrate from previous papers how you can approach the questions. But there's more to come, so keep on checking statuses, keep on checking WhatsApp groups, keep on getting updated. Okay, there's a hand up.
Hello, Dr. Wells, there is a question on the WhatsApp group about the in-depth classes and also the issue of exemption, given that a student has done economics for managers and also accounting for managers, and maybe the student want to pursue to MBA, so that student is likely to be exempted for both economics and accounting for managers because they weigh the same weight. So they want more clarity on that.
Okay, that's very true for sure from my experience that there is exemption, and I think you can ask the relevant people at the school who can assist you regarding the exemption process. Maybe you need to apply for it or they automatically exempt you from that. So I think you need to confirm that with the guys at UNISA, I'm sure. So yeah, but exemption is there, and it actually reduces your cost of the MBA program once you are done with economics and accounting. So yes, retake is free, because remember there were a lot of things that happened during that class, so it would be provided free. There's no payment there. Any other question?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, maybe clarity on that one. It will be free for those who have already paid for it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you for that. All right, guys, see you later on in other commitments or in other avenues again. But in short, the Universal Research Institute is your academic partner. We can help you get closer and closer to your dream career. So yeah, for now,
Are we getting the slides and the video from this assignment?
Videos and slides are always shared.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, guys.